Hi everybody and welcome back, another episode of On Air, and I'm joined today by Louis Fernandes, who is the brand new VP Sales EMEA, brand new VP Sales EMEA for Uberall. I'll let him tell you a little bit more about that in a moment. Louis and I have known each other for 2 or 3 years. I'm really excited to have him on the show today. We're going to be talking about what I'm going to describe in layman's terms as alignment between sales and marketing. I know that Louis is going to take that a step or two further and explain it's not just about sales and marketing, but I'm going to let him do that piece in a moment. Before we get into the topic, firstly, Louis, hello.
Hi, really glad to be here. Thank you so much for having me, Owen.
Pleasure. Really good of you to come on, and thanks for joining us. Let's start with the classic 2 minutes. Who is Louis? Who are Uberall? Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Let's start with me. I've been in the sort of SaaS sales and marketing space now for the best part of 20 years. I've worked for organizations like Axiom, SAP, SAS, HPE, Basware, a number of organizations, having done the transition from what was traditional on-prem into the cloud and so on and so forth. And I've always been in roles that are either, revenue focused or customer focused in terms of the delivery of those kind of services. I kind of started life though as a marketer, actually on the B2C side. And then the company I was working for got acquired by Axiom, and that's how I made the transition into tech and into, frontline sales. So it's been an interesting journey like that. As you rightly said, I'm brand spanking new into a new role at Uberall. Uberall is a SaaS vendor that looks specifically at marketing technologies and providing near me brand experiences. And what I mean by that is a lot of organizations have got a lot of information that they have on myriad platforms about who they are, where they are, what they provide, when they provide it, their opening hours, things like that. And oftentimes they have trouble curating it. What Uberall does is helps them curate it and make sure that they're then linking those online experiences with those offline experiences, driving footfall, and ultimately what everybody's in it for, drive revenue. So that's it in a nutshell.
Love that. So 2 things. Firstly, congratulations.
Thank you
it's
so
important
much.
to say that somebody in a new role.
I'm absolutely delighted. I'm really excited by the opportunity. It's great.
Brilliant. And the other thing is, if anybody's out there from Uberall, there's a great test of what an elevator pitch should look like. Not far into a new role, and there it is, nailing the elevator pitch already. Absolutely love that. An example set right there. Fantastic start. So let's get into it, because that's what we do on this show. We get straight into the meaty bit and get into the topic. So I described it as alignment between sales and marketing. I know you're going to describe it as another few steps beyond that. So I'll let you do it in your own words. What are we talking about today?
So I think it's one of these things that in a lot of B2B sales organizations, particularly in technology, there's always been, my feeling has been that there's always been a sort of us and them mentality that, on the one hand, you have sales who rule the roost, and marketing has been a subservient function to it. And I think even that sort of mentality, which, I just don't fully understand myself because it just doesn't equate. But I think it leads to some very strange behaviors, because ultimately an organization needs to be around collaborating across all functions, not just sales and marketing, towards a common goal. And that common goal is revenue generation. It's as simple as that. So rather than looking at it as somebody A in department A works for me and somebody B department, it's more about how do we collaborate together towards that common goal and work in partnership. And as you rightly say, I think originally, because of my background in marketing as a marketer, having moved into sales, one of the things that I've been very, very keen on doing is making sure that it's a meeting of equals, and that we have common goals. We have that congruence of goals, that same sort of drive towards those same results. We get measured in the same ways and we work towards the same objectives. Now that's how you start setting things up in a way that's built for success. So that's kind of where it starts.
That's brilliant. So it feels really obvious when you say it out loud, doesn't it? it feels like it's just the obvious place to be. Why are we having to say that out loud? So why don't companies think that way? In your experience, what are the things that are blockers that get in the way of this? Is it education? Is it understanding? Is it culture? What's there?
I think all three of those are great sort of parts to start off with. But let's start with culture. I think oftentimes, and this stems back from the sort of 80s and 90s, you know, the sales culture, very alpha male, sort of, you know, it's all about going out and selling X and Y and Z at any sort of cost. And what it hasn't taken into account is the world has fundamentally changed, even in those sort of 3-4 intervening decades. You know, right now, I think that the way that we interact with, you know, colleagues, the way we interact with our peers, the way we interact with our customers, it's much changed. And part of that has come around as a result of this move from being on-prem to being software as a service, particularly in the game that I've been in, right? And what I think people have missed is people have thought, you know, as I transition from enterprise software on-prem, all I need to do is take my stack and stick it in the cloud, and suddenly I'm a cloud organization doing software as a service, forgetting the most important part of that, the service element. And when you start talking about service, you have to win the business today, you've got to win the business tomorrow, and you've got to win the business the day after. That's not something that just sits with sales. And so I think the culture has fundamentally changed with a lot of organizations, and the ones that are lagging on that are the ones that lose. And I think where people embrace the fact that it is all working towards one common goal, you know, sales, marketing, customer success increasingly all have an equal stake in the conversation, all have an equal role to play, that's where you end up with real success metrics showing through, you know, the revenue numbers hitting hard, the profitability hitting hard, because again, we'll talk maybe about behaviors a bit later, but that's where I think it stems.
Yeah.
The other thing, sorry.
No, go ahead.
No, the other thing that I think you sort of talked about, you know, beyond culture was then education. And I think, again, one of the things that I've certainly noticed, having come from marketing into sales, is how little appreciation there has been in sales of what marketing does or how it does it.
Yeah.
And I also think that there's an issue then in terms of the what of marketing, because, again, we've often heard some quite derisory terms used to describe what marketing does, and it's seen as, you know, it's lead generation maybe and top of funnel activity, very tactical. What about things like defining, you know, the segments that you want to go after, the target market, and all that intelligence that comes into it? These are all strategic tasks that marketing traditionally would be, you know, tasked with. So, you know, it's a much broader discipline that people give it credit for, I think, and I think that's something that's been lost. Yeah,
really interesting. And you often see the best revenue leaders now are marketeers, and I've seen a real trend in that, which probably tells you everything you need to know. The perception that marketing is, you know, the chief of colouring in used to be the thought process, and I do think there's a lot of change that has to happen there. So some fantastic points there. It strikes me that this is, it sounds really obvious to say it, but this is something that needs to be top down. It can't be bottom up. It's got to start with CEO, company vision, goals, agenda around the boardroom table, doesn't it?
Absolutely. And I think we're seeing a slight shift at the moment, because again, we saw, you know, 10 years ago, the role of CRO didn't even exist.
Yeah.
Right. Let alone CCO, Chief Customer Officer. And that's what we actually have at Uberall. We don't have a Chief Revenue Officer. We have a Chief Customer Officer, because again, it's all very well talking about customer centricity, but if your focus is revenue, then how customer centric is that, would be my argument. That doesn't preclude you having sales, and that's fine. But, you know, if we're going to talk about customer centricity, it's about what does it mean to build an infrastructure around your customer needs and serving that customer in the best way possible.
Yeah.
So again, just going back in time a little bit, 10 years ago, it was very common you had a head of sales. You know, then it would be Chief Sales Officer, was everybody became chiefs.
Yeah.
And then suddenly that's transitioned again from Chief Sales Officer to Chief Revenue Officer. Now, the idea behind that clearly is to say, actually, it is around what I've described as that revenue continuum.
Yeah.
All the way from, you know, what does it mean from a go-to-market perspective? How does that translate through to marketing and the tasks that marketing has? What does it mean when it's applied to sales, from the top of the funnel all the way through to the close? What does it mean when we then transition out of sales and into implementation? And how finally do we realize value for both the customer and ourselves over time through customer success? And that's what a revenue officer, I feel, should be looking at, is that entire revenue continuum. But increasingly, I think we see that a lot of chief revenue officers have come purely up the sales route and have a reasonably narrow approach to it. And what I think is now beginning to change, and again, this is part of the reason I'm joining Uberall, is because I really do see that, you know, the philosophy behind it is about customer centricity. It is about understanding that revenue continuum is absolutely embodied in the values, in the philosophy, and in the culture of the organization. And I think that's vitally important.
I can just feel the knowledge oozing out of you, Louis. This is brilliant already. Fantastic. So you've just an absolute nugget there, which is around the CRO role. I mean, what a point that is. How customer centric, truly customer centric, having a CRO role doesn't make sense. I love that, because actually when you think about it, of course it doesn't, because it's so self-centered, it's self-focused and self-serving, and that is the counter of looking after your customers in many ways. So a really challenging and powerful point there that people can consider. So look, let's say you're going into an organization, whether it's Uberall or anywhere else, and you're looking from the outside, you're going to get the covers lifted off, look at the engine. What are the telltale signs for you that there isn't a revenue continuum mentality, there isn't alignment between the revenue departments? What are the things that you would look for?
Right, so one of the things that I've heard a lot, we need more leads.
Yeah, I heard that a few times.
So again, that talks to a volume game, and it talks to it's your responsibility in XYZ department, generally marketing, to provide me in sales with a number of leads. Otherwise, I'm not going to get off my backside and do anything. That immediately says to me the mentality is all wrong. Because again, one of the things that I'm clear about is that a volume of leads is irrelevant. It's the quality of what comes through, whether it fits into your absolute ideal customer profile. And who defines that ideal customer profile is generally a partnership between different departments within an organization, because it's important to not, like I said, not just be able to realize revenue on day one, but on day 365, in year 3, in year 5. And so some of the things that, again, I'm starting to look at now, rather than just ARR and revenue, which is very important, don't get me wrong, but equally metrics like CAC to LTV, cost of acquisition to lifetime value, really important. NPS, I mean, if a customer's not happy with what you've provided them with 12 months down the line, 1, they're not referenceable, and 2, there's a massive chance of churn. So, does this then make it a worthwhile target for acquisition when you've been in the sales process in the first place? So, understanding those kind of things, and this is why I say it extends beyond marketing and sales, and now further and further things like customer success becomes really important. So it's those kind of things. The other thing is then around metrics, and I've started talking about metrics even in this short bit just now. But where I see, marketing departments still measuring MQLs, SQLs, rather than actually having the same sort of metrics around opportunities, value, revenue. If we're all aligned on these things, then that says to me that actually, we're all working in the same direction rather than everybody going in different directions.
Yeah, I've got a goal to hit in a number of leads, therefore I'll sacrifice quality to get there, to show that I'm doing my piece.
Because I think one of the most costly things for an organization is chasing down leads that were never going to become opportunities. And it's kind of interesting. There's a guy called Andy White, who you may or may not be aware of.
He's been on the show.
Oh, brilliant. So, the stuff that he talks about, nobody ever regretted qualifying out, right? And that's one of his favorite phrases. And I sit there and I think, that's exactly right. Nobody ever regretted qualifying out. And I love that. So actually applying some real rigor to the qualification process, even right at the top of the funnel. When saying, is this actually my ideal customer profile that we're actually targeting, so that when I do speak to them and they move beyond an SDR into a sales exec kind of feel,
Yeah.
Are we still having the right conversation that's going to lead to the right revenue? Because for me, the most expensive activity in sales is chasing down the opportunity that is never going to close.
Yeah. Yeah.
And any revenue leader, anybody who's responsible for those kind of things across the entire revenue continuum will know that to be true. And I'm sure when you look at your numbers, you're sitting there going, this thing has been sitting there for 12, 18, 24 months, and it's just on a wing and a prayer. It's never going to happen.
Yeah.
And that's the kind of thing where I think it's really important to sort of look at.
Yeah, I love that. And look, it's numbers and maths, isn't it? The great thing about numbers is it never lies. So if you only ever convert 20% of your opportunities, then assuming they're evenly spread in terms of resource allocation, which won't be the case, but for the example, let's assume that they are, technically 80% of your time is spent on deals that are never going to close. So how do you get better at identifying who they are so that you can bring others in that could be part of the 20%? And it's a really interesting topic that clearly people are latching onto at the moment, and rightly so.
I'd go one step further, actually, Owen, and say it's not even the 20%, because if it's 20%, that means you're not qualifying right. That number needs to be a lot further north.
Yeah. No,
because I think if you're only spending time on the things that are properly qualified in, then great, fantastic.
Yeah.
You're like 50, 60, 70%. Why not?
Yeah, it's a really good point to get them out earlier in the sales cycle. So let's just dive into the how. So I get the why. I'm starting to get my head around the why this is important, how this ties together, why we want people, so your head of marketing and your head of sales thinking on the same page, working towards the same goals, not pointing the fingers, but collaborating. All that sort of stuff makes sense. And I think it will to the audience. How do you go about doing that, though? So it starts top down with vision and culture and those sorts of things. But let's just walk through the next few steps, because it's really easy to sit around a boardroom table and say, so we want to do it. We want to do it. Cool. Like, what happens next as you walk out that office door and you go and start talking to people and looking at processes and systems? What are some of the next steps you'd be thinking of?
Right. So you map it out. And by that, I mean, for me, there are always three things. There is, exactly as you say, there is the congruence of goals.
Yeah.
Really important that we're all on the same page with our goals. What are we being measured on? What are we actually going to try and achieve? And then we can work out how we're going to achieve it. But we need to establish that first.
Yeah.
Secondly, it is then around the people. And that's the attitudes, the values, the beliefs, the skills, the understanding, the respect of that. And it's a difficult thing to change, but if the culture's not right, then the culture needs to change. And that, again, as you've rightly said right at the beginning, that needs to come from the top down. It can't happen from the bottom up. And it's being unequivocal about these are the things that we stand for, and this is how we are going to work. And respecting that, everyone in the organization is contributing towards the success of the organization. I think that's imperative. Okay. And the last bit, once you've done that, is the last piece is around collaboration, genuinely putting in place those collaborative ways of working and having, groups and project teams to put in place the infrastructures, to put in place the processes, both from a technological perspective and from a governance perspective, that work across the piece. And I think that's where you start, and it's how the leadership then work together.
Yeah. It's one of those things where you can easily draw it up on a whiteboard and go, geez, that's big, that's really big, too hard basket. What would you say to somebody who does that? Because I think that I can see people looking at this, listening to this conversation and agreeing with everything you're saying, but also just not seeing that, not being able to see that journey or understand it, or feeling like it's too far away. What would you say to somebody who starts to get the fear of change and maybe a bit skeptical about the journey they have to go on to achieve it?
Just get in there and try it. And this is interesting. It's exactly what I did at both SAS and HPE, because I wasn't, in a position where I necessarily had control of budgets in both those roles, but I had to get hold of those things. And the easiest way for me was to find a few like-minded people in those different departments, create a little coalition, and almost do it as a skunk works thing. And once you've got it up and running, we did remarkable things. Just got up and running and created some amazing results, and that suddenly gets noticed as like, hang on a minute, what are these guys doing differently? And then, what was interesting was, having done that at SAS, having done that at HPE, when I then went to Basware, we did exactly the same thing and brought a great, collaborator of mine into the organization, marketing director, who we'd worked together in a lot of different instances. So we thought this in similar ways, got it off the ground, and that then became best practice globally, because we'd proven it in our market. And that's how I would do it. You can go crawl, walk, run. It doesn't have to be big bang, but but that's more if you're somewhere in the middle of the infrastructure, as opposed to, as we've already advocated, leading from the front and leading from the top. But yeah, it is doable. I just think it's one of these things that then requires bringing together the right people. It's a little bit like I'm sure you will be aware of books like the Challenger Sale and the Challenger Customer.
Yeah.
It's just finding the people in the organization that are prepared just to stick their neck out or above the parapet. Choose your metaphor of choice, and just get on with it.
Yeah. Can I go back to something you said earlier? So
sure.
I see a trend in revenue leaders, business leaders, whatever we want to call, fairly senior leadership team members, commercial roles, who outwardly talk about how sales tend to box marketing, and don't understand it. I've mentioned chief of colouring in and things like that. I think the same is true the other way around as well, just as much. So marketing people very much, your analogy earlier about the 80s sales rep, very male dominated. I think a lot of marketing people still think of sales that way as well. One of the things that, maybe I'm challenging it because I want to make sure we say both sides out loud and we're fair to our audience, where we have sales and marketing contributors. But do you see it that way, or do you think it's one direction actually more than the other?
No, I do see that as well. I just think that the power is elsewhere. But my advice to marketers who are feeling like that is go out on a sales call with a sales rep.
Yeah.
Just get there, understand what goes on. See a deal all the way through. Talk to your customers, because again, I think a lot of the things that happen in B2B marketing particularly is the marketers are never allowed near a customer. That is a fatal flaw. The best feedback you will ever get is directly from your customer. Work with your sales reps, work with your customer success teams, sit in front of customers, and that's also how you demonstrate the desire to collaborate.
I like that. Do you know what? One of the things that we were talking about internally the other day was the fact that our best marketing messaging comes from our sales conversations. So when we're talking to potential customers and they tell us why they don't want to buy, or they tell us why they might want to buy in the future, or what's going on in their business, we're learning about what's happening in the market. And so much of that gets lost from those conversations through to our marketing messaging. And I can see that a mechanism even there would make such a difference. So I'm glad you agree, because I see it that way. I think it's a universal problem from department to department that we box and we assume, and we tend to stay at arm's length and not want to learn. And I think a culture where companies encourage that and say, you know what, marketers, go and meet customers. What a great idea that is, with customer success, but also new business. Go to some new business meetings, and we've got this now. So much of it is virtual and recorded. You don't even have to physically be there at the time to learn and experience it, which is amazing. But I think the same is true of salespeople. Get in and understand, contribute to the marketing discussion. What should we be doing? Where are our customers hanging out? All those sorts of things.
100%. But and this is an interesting thing. I remember I was doing some work a few years ago with a marketing agency I'd worked with previously in my previous lives, kind of thing. Brought them on board to do the B2B stuff around demand generation with us, both at SAS and HPE. Brought me, and the first thing I did was say, right, okay, when we're going to go to the meetings with our marketing colleagues, we are taking sales along so they can A, see and understand what the process is like, and B, contribute towards it with those insights that otherwise you just don't get. And this is where you then create that whole idea around collaboration, and actually we're all in it together and we all want the same outcomes. And our success is your success is our success, and that's how you really drive it. And there's nothing quite like it. I mean, you sit there and you watch people literally getting excited about, wow, this is how we're going to break this.
Yeah, yeah. It's interesting because we see. We're sharing notes here, but I think it's great because it's just emphasising the point of where it's broken in a lot of organisations. We see, sales reps, even this is CRO or leadership coming in and saying, this is what we want you to do. We'll go out and generate some pipeline, have some conversations, generate some demand based on that, and then the sales reps pick up those opportunities and go, what are these opportunities? We don't talk about it like that. And even between one department at different levels, it's disjointed, let alone other departments. So I can really see the power of linking this together. Have you got maybe any examples, either good ones or bad ones, where you've seen this alignment and mentality really be achieved, and the power and the benefits and the outcome of that, or indeed complete failure where you've seen something fall apart because they didn't do it?
So let's talk to some of the successes. So I've mentioned some of the places I've been at in the past, and it's been really, I've been either fortunate or well prepped to get these things off the ground. But in the space of what was a 12-month period at SAS, drove 65 million of pipeline and 12.5 million closed. That's the result. And this was from a standing start on just 2 campaigns, where we really looked at bringing in Challenger, really looked to bring sales and marketing together. Everybody worked collaboratively on it, and everybody, did really well on the numbers.
Yeah.
And at HPE, again, from a standing start, that was just over 144 million in pipeline and 21 closed in 12 months. Those are really great results. And, the budgets that were put into those things were not massive. And the ROIs were phenomenal. But again, what it allowed was, as soon as senior leadership in those organizations start seeing those things, they're going, there's something here. And we need to understand how that works. And ultimately it is about, how do you define the proposition? Having very clear definitions of what not just the proposition, but the value proposition. How do you articulate that value? And this is something that the marketers are great at helping sales do, right? You create playbooks, you create the value statements, you understand from a case study point of view exactly how XYZ company has previously driven value in that space, and how that's similar to people you want to target. It's all about that communication of stories, the communication of ideas. That's what's important, because I think oftentimes we spend too much time worrying about our deal, that we don't necessarily focus on the side of the business that is really important. That's the people in it. If it's all about me and my deal, then how am I worrying about you and your business and your numbers and what's important for you? So the success is generally where you can flip it on its head, and it goes back to what I said right at the top of the conversation, where you're not thinking about me, my revenue, you're thinking about you, your success, Mr. Customer Prospect, and how do I serve you to achieve that?
Yeah, you've said a couple of things there that are brilliant, and two words that I keep coming back to as I'm thinking through is, one is communication. You've said it probably 100 times already, and the other is leadership. Any project like this or big business problem can be fixed with strong leadership and good communication, and everything else is an offshoot of those two things, isn't it?
Absolutely. And the communication piece, I mean, we talked about examples where it hasn't necessarily gone great. And that's where I've walked into situations where we're not selling as efficiently as we could do. There is the communication between marketing and sales and everybody else in the revenue continuum, and actually it's reflected immediately in the NPS scores. In one instance, I walked in and the NPS score was atrocious, and the reason it was atrocious was because all that was happening was the organization was firefighting tactical problems reactively, and then not communicating. And we go back to this communication piece again, not communicating to the customer what was going on, what would happen next, or what the expectation should be. And I maintain this all the time. 95% of all organizational issues can be solved through just better communication. People are willing to forgive mistakes, I think. But so long as they know what's going on. It's the lack of clarity, the lack of knowledge, the lack of transparency that really cause the angst, the fear, and the distrust.
So true.
And the only thing you have in business really ultimately is trust, and communication breeds trust.
Yeah, love that. Look, we're heading towards the end, so I'm going to give you an open question, which is what else would you add? Is there anything else that we've missed in terms of questions I should have asked you, or anything else you'd add to the business case around this true alignment across your revenue continuum?
There are loads of things to touch on.
Yeah, I mean,
this is such, I've been talking about this, Owen, for at least a decade, right?
Yeah.
And I'm passionate about trying to bring marketing and sales to get together. I mean, it's where the magic happens. And genuinely, I think the main thing for me, that I think if there's one takeaway from this conversation tool, communicate. And you've said it yourself.
Yeah.
Communicate.
Yeah. Fantastic. You've bucked a trend. I've noticed that the three roles you referred to a lot are all just letters rather than words. So, you know, SAS, SAPS, HB, all that kind of stuff. You go into Uberall, it's a word rather than a few letters, which is.
I know. Well, you know, maybe that was the secret and the magic sauce. But
maybe.
You know,
I thought you might have qualified them down and just gone for like IBM and a few of those sorts of companies that only have a few letters in, and go from there.
Yeah, well, do you know what I think is really exciting about Uberall particularly is, and one of the things I'm really looking forward to, is just getting stuck in that kind of a culture. I mean, that's the thing that I'm so impressed with, is that there's not one person I've met so far in my journey, although it's been a short journey with Uberall, who hasn't been immediately impressive and immediately, you know, switched on and bought into the direction of travel. And that for me is half the battle won.
Look, it sounds like an amazing win-win. They're lucky to have you on board, Louis, and I'm sure you'll do some great things there. Thank you. Thank you very much for sharing your thoughts and your ideas and your experience and expertise across this conversation. Feel like we could keep pulling it out of your brain as we keep going, but we have to come to an end. Where do you like to hang out? If people want to connect with you or talk to you, reach out to you, where are you best contactable?
Well, I would say there's a particular bar, but let's move beyond that. No, LinkedIn is a great way forward. If you just type my name in, I'm generally the first person who comes up.
Yeah, fantastic. Well, look, thank you. Really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me. It's been a delight to be on.
Yeah, great. We'll speak again soon. Thanks for being on air.
Owen, thanks very much. Have a great day.